Just 2 sleeps to go, 2 sleeps until Premier League football is back. Behind closed doors are not quite the same as we know, but enough to get the excitement levels up ahead of the season's finale. Hello, welcome along to Football Social Daily from Sports Social, the podcast packed with Premier League news and opinions. From Wednesday, we'll be bringing you a brand new podcast every single day of the week, discussing all the action. So hit that subscribe button, however you listen to your podcast, and you won't ever miss an episode. On today's show, we'll be discussing Marcus Rashford. The Manchester United man has been doing stellar work off the field during the coronavirus pandemic. He's even written to the government to ask them to consider some of the issues close to his heart. We'll discuss whether more footballers should be doing similar in a moment. Also, the latest round of coronavirus testing has revealed a Norwich City player has tested positive for COVID-19. That player even played in a friendly against Spurs at the weekend, but nobody else will have to self-isolate. We'll explain why shortly. And of course, it wouldn't be Football Social Daily without a dive into the latest transfer news, which today includes new contracts at Sheffield United and an update on the Arsenal future of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I'm Niall. Alongside me on today's podcast, we have two of the seven dwarves, Jim Salverson, who's happy, and Marley Anderson, who appears to be sneezy. Hello, lads.
Yeah,
You've been sneezing away, Marley, because the hay fever has got the better of you, and you were supposed to get married this weekend, so a load of flowers have rocked up at your house. Is that right?
I was, yeah. I made the mistake of buying my fiance some flowers on Tuesday, and then I realised, on Thursday. Then I realised on Friday that everyone else would have the same idea. So now I've got 5 bouquets of flowers, a high pollen count outside, so I can't even go for a run. And I'm just sniffing and sneezing everywhere. I've got some tissue here to try and wipe my nose. And we're on camera as well, so I can't really do that because that looks bad. So you might have to just bear with me for a bit. It's not my finest hour, but it is what it is.
It's like some kind of self-flagellation if you're a hay fever sufferer just buying a load of flowers in.
Yeah, I didn't think it through at all.
Badges.
Yeah, you don't ever become a florist in your post-media career, Marley. I don't think it'll work out too well for you. But what has been working out well is the charity work that Marcus Rashford has been doing. The Manchester United man has been absolutely incredible during this lockdown period. He's been doing more than his part off the pitch during this coronavirus pandemic. He even wrote a letter to MPs this weekend addressing the issue of child poverty in the UK. The United forward said, "The system isn't built for families like mine." And this is something he said in the same week that data from the Office of National Statistics revealed that Wythenshawe, which is the area of Manchester that Rashford is from, has suffered from the most deaths due to coronavirus in the whole of Greater Manchester. Now, we know that Marcus Rashford is very keen to give back to the community, and that community of Wythenshawe in comparison to the rest of Greater Manchester, it's probably one of the underprivileged areas of the city. And we all know, because we live in the city of Manchester. So we know that Rashford is keen to give back to his local community. But should more footballers, Jim, be using their platforms in the way that Marcus Rashford has? I mean, because to me, it feels like footballers like Rashford are a rare breed. Are really that many of them actually bothered about politics and about change, or are they just perhaps too afraid to use that platform to express their views?
I think first off, we have to give massive credit to Marcus Rashford for what he has done over the last few weeks. I think he's raised £20 million for charities in need of financial support this time, which is absolutely incredible. And it's an indication of exactly how long we've been without football, that so much has changed. We've seen games now, it's acceptable to watch a game without fans. We've seen Manchester City fans giving credit to Marcus Rashford, which I never thought I'd see happen in my day. Jack Wilshere's fit as well, which is just like, wow, how has this happened before the return of Premier League? So it's just another sign that actually, yeah, times are changing slightly, and Rashford has done himself proud over the last few weeks and months in doing that. In terms of whether footballers should do more, I think it's easy to say yes, isn't it? They've got a platform, they've got financial backing, and it would be nice to see them stepping up to the plate and not just using their money, but using the power they have and the networks they have to create real social change. But you could probably level that criticism at pretty much everyone. And I include myself in that. It's like everyone could do more for charity. They could do more for social change. But footballers are no different to us. They're a little bit lazy. They're a little bit greedy. They're a little bit wrapped up in their own world, as we all are. So expecting them to do that, I think, is very different to actually them doing that. It would be lovely to see more footballers taking that action, but I don't think it's fair to put that pressure on them.
Do you think, Marley, as well, that that there are a section of footballers that probably are interested in politics but are maybe afraid to speak up because they're worried about kind of jeopardising their roles at the club, or maybe saying something out of turn, or kind of causing unnecessary heat? Because we know Premier League footballers now, a lot of them have got social media managers who actually kind of run their accounts for them. So do you think that there may be an element of that, footballers kind of being a little bit more cautious about saying stuff?
Yeah, maybe, because I suppose if you're the one to put your head above the parapet, so to speak, like, you're sort of there to be shot at. And even though Rashford isn't doing something which shouldn't separate people, there's always going to be there's always going to be haters and people who are like, oh, stay in your box, stay in your lane, stick to what you're good at. You're just a footballer, blah blah blah. And it takes a certain type of character, I think, to be able to say, nah, this is more important than that. So even if I get taken down, I'm sort of standing for something. And that's what's so good about Rashford, the fact that he's 22 years old, and he's arguably done more for the country than or as much as the government has in this time. Like, he's solving a problem that isn't his to solve. Like, the fact that kids aren't having school meals and can't be fed isn't a Premier League footballer's job, but he's took it on himself because he's got to a position where a lot of footballers get to, where they're in a position to help other people. And for one reason or another, they just don't. And Rashford's like, well, I'm not going to be like that. It shouldn't be like that. He seems to be very, liberal and want to give back to his area. He still does a lot of stuff in his area, helping out his I think it's Fletcher Moss Rangers, his old club. He's been back there a few times and helping out there and what have you. And now he's doing this, but we can never know why more people don't do this. But it's good that it's obviously great that he's doing this, because someone has to, because the government's clearly not. They've got other things on the plate at the minute, and two, were they ever bothered in the first place? It's their policies that have set out this change, this situation. So it's up to someone to change it. And Rashford's, fair play to him. He's been the man who said, right, I'll do it.
But I think you have mentioned there exactly why more footballers don't do it. And it's very difficult to find anything wrong at all with what Marcus Rashford is doing. There is no criticism to be levelled at him in this scenario. And the whole child poverty, child hunger thing is absolutely shameful in this country. But the reason that issue exists, as you say, Marley, it's down to the government, or successive governments, at least, if you don't want to be apolitical about it. And we've seen how tribalistic politics has got over the last 5 or 6 years. Yeah, and because he's doing something good, but at the same time, it's kind of a swipe at the government. He's stepping into doing something that the welfare state should be doing. Ultimately.
I think it's good, though, Jim,
because that's a criticism, he'll get criticised. It's tall poppy syndrome.
He's not been malicious about it, though, has he? I mean, it's not like you see it, like you mentioned, it's been quite tribalist, the political spectrum, over the last couple of years. He's been quite considered and measured about it, and he's put on his Twitter and his social media accounts, here's a letter I wrote to MPs, here's a letter I wrote to the government. He's not specifically putting his foot in a camp, although maybe his campaigning shows that he's more leaning to one way than the other. He's definitely not labelling or branding himself as a certain type of political person, which I think is to his benefit.
I thought also he framed the letter in quite an interesting way, and the interview he gave alongside it was kind of like, here's how I've benefited personally from this in the past. And he talked about how when he was growing up, he wouldn't have had the right diet and the right food, essentially, if it wasn't for services like this to become a professional footballer. So he wouldn't have been getting the right nutrients to be able to set himself on the path that he was set into, and he wouldn't have been able to kind of he talks about how he was able to take advantage of the Manchester United Youth Academy and going into digs early because there was no room in his house. And I think he's one of 5 or 6 children, and his mother was a single mother and couldn't afford to feed them all properly in the way he would have needed to, essentially. So he's drawing on his personal experience. He knows about this stuff. He's not just sitting in an ivory tower kind of saying, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. He's handled it in a really fair and good way. I mean, there's lots of talk about statues at the moment and who should be getting statues where. If there's any dodgy ones to be torn down, get rid of them. Get Marcus Rashford statues erected in Manchester.
I think it speaks volumes as well, Marley, that loads of City fans have kind of thrown the rivalry by the wayside to praise Rashford in what he's done, and what he has done, like Jim said earlier, does transcend, the kind of
the divide,
yeah, between the two sets of fans, the nature of football, the tribalist nature of football, that's kind of been thrown down by the wayside too.
Yeah, I think to be fair, you've got to be a massive idiot to let football tribalism come before something that is clearly for the greater good like this. You have to be a special type of person to say, yeah, well, it's not that good because he's a Man United player and David Silva could have done that or something like that. If you're a Man City fan, it's just, it has to go above football because it just clearly is, isn't it? It's clearly more important to everyone. And if there is ever going to be something that unites rival football fans from the north, it's probably that north-south divide of all the decision makers are down south. You know what I mean? Like they don't care about the north kind of thing, and it's taken a northerner like Rashford to come up with something that is correcting their problems that they've created. So it's good. It's one thing to bring everyone together and to finally sort of get this, try and improve the future of our country by just simply feeding kids, which when you think about it, it's just a ridiculous thing, isn't it? I mean, how do you improve the future? You just feed the young people because
keep them alive. Sure,
just try and keep them alive every now and again. You know what I mean? Just give them some chicken butties or something.
Don't start the north-south divide, because you're actually outnumbered 2-1 here, Marley. Although Jim, I think, is an adopted northerner, so I don't know how that would work. Anyway, let's talk about the latest Premier League coronavirus testing. 1,200 tests took place. A couple of people tested positive for the virus. We know that one of those players was a Norwich City player. Now, that player has not been revealed or identified by the club, probably rightly so, confidentiality reasons and all the rest of it. But that player did feature in a friendly on Friday night against Tottenham Hotspur, and that player will self-isolate. But all the other players that played in that game and all the other people that were involved in that game won't have to self-isolate, Jim, because according to the Premier League guidelines around coronavirus at the moment, ahead of the restart, those players weren't in contact with that infected player for long enough for it to be considered a health risk. So my question would be, how long does it take for a globule of spit to land on you to therefore make it infect? I mean, if you wipe it off within 5 seconds, are you all of a sudden safe?
Yeah.
Like, how does this make sense?
So, in terms of, I mean, I don't want to alarm you, but I'm not a doctor. It's not I'm not professional. I think the actual guidelines in terms of the track and trace system the government have in place, which is our point of reference, right? So in terms of when someone gets coronavirus and you get a phone call from someone going, well, who have you been in contact with for the last 7 days or whatever, you need to have been in contact with that person at close quarters for 15 minutes, I think that's the guidelines. So has this player been in close contact with any one individual for 15 minutes? Probably on the pitch, you'd say no. You don't really spend, out of a 90-minute game, you probably wouldn't spend that much time within 2 meters of one other individual. Outside of the game, we've got absolutely no way of knowing at the moment, and we don't know how that's going to go. It seems like in any normal circumstances, those players would be isolating. The Norwich City squad would be isolating, and the Tottenham squad would be isolating. If that happens once, if they have one incident that works like that with the Premier League resumption, the whole thing's off the table. Because the way the fixtures are piled up, the fact that we've got 3 or 4 games a day every single day from now until whenever the season finishes, you can't afford 2-week postponements, which is what it would mean. And I think what Spurs have got Manchester United first. I forget who their second game's against. But if you took those 2 games out of the equation and went, well, we need to reschedule these, it makes the whole thing untenable and unmanageable. So we've seen a lot of rule bending, I think, over the last few weeks, not just in football, but in general, in terms of getting the economy and football back on the rails again. And I think we'll probably see a lot more. So common sense, we're supposed to be using our common sense, to me would say you'd quarantine those players, you'd postpone those games, but it just can't happen. What I think is really concerning is we haven't even started again yet. We haven't even started playing games yet, and we're having incidents like this that could derail the return of the Premier League season, and I have no idea how that's going to manage going forward.
I think you've got a really good point there, Jim. To me, it feels a little bit, Marley, like they've kind of let this one go, which is almost a dangerous narrative to take, considering it's a virus which has killed, close to 50 to 60,000 people in this country. They kind of swept it under the carpet a little bit in a way, the Premier League, just because, like Jim said, they don't want to risk the whole thing falling through.
Yeah, it does appear to have taken that approach, doesn't it? I mean, it's bad news, and they've gone, oh well, it's coming back on Wednesday, and it's Friday now. We can't postpone it again, and it's a bit too late now. It's sort of tough. And then they've come out with this thing of the 15 minutes in contact with players, which I read that. Sorry, I seen the video of that, the woman on Sky Sports explaining why the Norwich player would have to isolate, but no one else would. And my jaw just dropped. I was speechless. I was like, how is this now a thing? Because the one thing I thought of is, if it takes 15 minutes for this 15 minutes of contact to spread the virus, then there's so many people that have died without seeing their families because they can't go and see them. If you had a granddad or a dad or a brother dying in the hospital, you can't go and see them because you will get infected. And then all of a sudden they're going, well, actually, you've got to be in contact with them for 15 minutes and all this. It's like the virus doesn't wait 15 minutes before it decides to transfer. If I have it and you come near me and I spit on you in 30 seconds, you're gonna get it quicker. Or if I sweat and you touch me from a corner, you're marking me, whatever, I'm sure that can spread. It doesn't take 15 minutes. That's just a load of BS. It's complete. It's not right. It can't be right. Medically cannot be right.
I think you're right as well, because you mentioned about people going and see people who are kind of suffering, loved ones who perhaps, might be on their deathbed, for want of a better term. If the virus doesn't spread unless you're within 15 minutes close contact of someone, then why can't those people go and hold the hands of their wife giving birth for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? If 15 minutes is the threshold, then it doesn't make any sense both ways.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm going to attempt to play the part of the Premier League here and justify it a little bit. And there is a danger that we're talking about stuff that we don't really understand, and I think it's very difficult to find anyone. You have experts on the news, and you'll get two people having completely contrasting views, and it's such a new thing that nobody really understands it. But I think it's to do with the amount of time you spend with someone is to do with viral load, and how the longer you spend with an infected person, the worse your case would be. Essentially, it's not just one bug or one germ that kind of infiltrates your system. It's like if you spend longer with someone who has coronavirus, then your symptoms are worse. We're talking about, with the Premier League and with Premier League players, they're already isolating. So they are away from the general public. They are away from family, I believe. I think that's the scenario. So they, for the period of the Premier League resuming, are in a bubble, essentially. So the only risk to Premier League players is other Premier League players and other teammates, potentially club doctors, club staff and whatnot. That group is a very low risk group. So in order for them to be negatively affected, they would have to have a bad case of the virus. I guess that is the thinking here, in terms of these people, they're fit, they're strong, they're healthy, they've had minimal contact with an individual, and so it doesn't really have too much effect on what happens. But
I saw an interesting.
It's difficult.
I saw an interesting clip on Twitter, a video clip of Ander Herrera following around Eden Hazard from a game between Chelsea and Manchester United ages ago. But man marking, obviously, after the restart, is going to be quite firmly out the window, because that would be close quarters for more than 15 minutes. I mean, if you follow the lead that Ander Herrera took in that match, he was following Hazard around absolutely everywhere. I think he followed him to the toilet for a piss at one stage. It wouldn't surprise me. But If I'm
But
honest, I
are they going to?
think
Does
it's
that mean
weird.
teams will stop their? Does that mean teams will change their tactics?
Well,
Because you're right.
this is the fascinating thing. I mean, if that's off the table, what do you do? And then what parts do the referees have to play? Because we see players spitting all the time in the Premier League on television. It's almost a habit for a lot of these players, kind of clearing their mouths and noses and spitting on the floor. I mean, that's going to have to stop. I mean, the referee, for want of a better term, is the policeman. He's the man in the middle. He's the guy who kind of enforces the rules. So what kind of a part will the referees have to play in terms of ensuring that everyone's adhering to the guidelines? I mean, have they got much more responsibility now, as you feel?
I can't
I
see
think
how they can be given that responsibility of policing people's actions. Things like spitting. I mean, if you're a referee, how do you stop 22 people 360 degrees around you from spitting on the floor? That's got to be part of a player's social responsibility, hasn't it? And I mean, I've been doing a lot of running during lockdown, and I would quite often you spit when you're running. Well, sometimes when you're doing exercise, you need to get rid of excess fluids, don't you? And you do that, but you just moderate your behaviour because you know it's irresponsible and you know you shouldn't be doing it. And more to do with the social pressure around you, I guess. You know that if you're going for a run and you've got people in a park around you, they're not going to enjoy you spitting on the ground in the current environment. So you just don't do it. So I think that's up to the players rather than the referee.
If there's one thing that's come out of this, if you're listening to the podcast and you see Jim running, stay well away from Jim because you don't know what might be coming your way.
It's like when you go to an animal safari park and they say stay away from the llamas because they spit. Except you've got Jim running around Charlton just giving it spits everywhere,
Gobbing everywhere.
Anyway, hopefully those players that have contracted coronavirus do recover quickly, and we can get the ball rolling again on Wednesday. As it looks like we're all ready to go to schedule, which is great stuff. Right then, time for a quick break here on Football Social Daily. But afterwards, we'll be talking about the latest transfer news, including updates on the futures of Jadon Sancho and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Football Social Daily from Sports Social, the Premier League podcast packed with news and opinion. And on Wednesday, and moving forward every day from then until the end of the season, we'll be bringing you a brand new podcast every single day of the week. So hit the subscribe button and you won't miss another episode of the show again. We'll be dissecting all the action, previewing all the games, and all the big talking points will be covered as well. So as I say, hit that subscribe button or follow or whatever it may be, and you won't miss another episode. Right then, time to chat transfer news here on Football Social Daily, and we're going to start with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Now, we've spoken about Aubameyang a few times on the podcast, Marley. Again, yeah, over lockdown, we've spoken about it a few times, but now the latest development is an interesting one because it comes from the player himself. Aubameyang says the ball is in Arsenal's court over his future, and it's up to Arsenal to convince him to sign a new deal. So for me, that suggests that Arsenal haven't done exactly that. They haven't really given him a tempting enough offer to put pen to paper on signing a new deal at the Emirates.
Yeah, it sounds like that, doesn't it? I mean, if the player's saying that, then you would kind of assume that it's never really started. There's never really been a solid effort to make him sign, because I don't think Arsenal can't keep him. Like, I don't think he's desperate to leave. I don't think he's one of them who'd rather leave. He seems like a fairly placid guy, and a guy who would not want to rock the boat that much in terms of his future. So I don't know. We could be wrong. He could be asking for the world, but it doesn't seem like that. It just seems like Arsenal are kind of going, oh well, he's good, but he's expensive and he's 30, and if he loses his pace, he's not very good. And we've got Nketiah and Martinelli, and how good are they, and that kind of thing. And realistically, this guy's scored so many goals, he should be able to make his own contract, like to say, I want this much and you pay me it because I've scored you 75 goals in 3 years or whatever he's done. And if you want to save money, you can save money on Ozil on 350 grand a week. Lacazette's on a fair wedge and plays in the same position. So if you want to get rid of somebody from that department, then make it him. So for me, I don't really know why it's taking so long, but I'm not really that surprised that Arsenal are making a mockery of this, because they've had a bit of a record of getting things off the field wrong for a few years now, and it doesn't seem to be going away.
They seem to take absolutely ages to get contracts sorted for top players. I mean, almost to the point where they leave it so late, Jim, that they risk losing some of their best assets. And as Marley says, Aubameyang's 30. He's got an absolutely class goal record in the Premier League. However, Arsenal aren't a Champions League club. I would dare say that even after this restart, they're not going to finish in the Champions League spots. And I'll hold my hands up and say, sorry if I'm wrong, but I just can't see it happening. And, you know, the chances are that Aubameyang, as the old cliche goes, has got one last big move in him at the age of 30 with a great goal record. He should be wanting to play Champions League football. If Arsenal can't offer him that, then they're going to have to offer him something else lucrative in terms of his contract in order to keep him at the club, surely.
Yeah, I mean, the fact you mentioned it's his last contract, and you're probably right, which means he's probably looking for a big contract and a long contract as well. He's going to want a 5-year deal, and he's going to want in excess of, I don't know what he's on now, but I'd figure he's probably on around £300,000 a week or something around that ballpark. And there's going to be a certain limited amount of clubs that are going to be willing to take a 30-year-old on a 5-year deal at this stage, because realistically, you get 3 years out of that. And then it's probably time for him to move on somewhere. And is anyone going to buy a player out of a 2-year incredibly lucrative contract? Maybe not. So there's a big financial commitment from someone. And if he is looking for just Champions League football, that kind of limits where his options are and whether he's better than the other Champions League qualified clubs, certainly from the Premier League, having their ranks or not is a completely different question. I think for Arsenal, you kind of hinted at the issue there, is they've got a similar situation to Manchester United had when they bought in Alexis Sanchez on an absolutely ridiculous deal. They've got players like Mesut Ozil, and I don't want to blame all of Arsenal's problems on Mesut Ozil because it's very easy to do, but they've got a player there who's offering very little to the team on a week-by-week basis. He's on £350,000 a week. And then you've got a player who, in Aubameyang's case, sees himself as pivotal to Arsenal going forward and offers a lot to that team. And he's going, well, if he's on 350 grand a week, surely I'm worth 500 grand a week, 600 grand a week. And rightly so. I mean, he probably offers twice as much to that team as Mesut Ozil. And that's a really difficult scenario for Arsenal to be in. And we saw, I'm sure you've seen Sunderland Till I Die, where they have the Marley's like, no, not watching that filth. They have contract negotiations with a young player whose name I forget off the top of my head, and it's interesting to see. You see the board sit down and they go, this guy is our key asset at the moment.
Oh, Josh Marger, you're thinking of.
That's it.
Josh Marger went to Bordeaux in the end, yeah.
And he's asking for a lot of money off the back of, from his agents kind of in his ear going, you need a better deal, you need a better deal. He's telling the club, it's out of my hands, I'd like to stay, but you need to offer me the right amount. And at one point the board just have to go, well, this is as much as we're prepared to offer you. This is as much as the value we see we're going to get back from you is. So I guess it's a couple of zeros removed, but it's the same scenario. The Arsenal board are probably going, well, this is how much we're going to put towards this player. This is the value we see in him. And it might not quite match up to what Aubameyang thinks his value is.
Unless you want to sign Will Grigg, in which case you do find a couple of extra million out of your ass from somewhere, as was the case when Sunderland needed to replace Josh Marger. I did watch that documentary just purely because Pompey had their pants down a couple of times throughout that season, which was worth watching from my perspective. I mean, we've both said, Marley, in the past that we think Aubameyang is likely to move on. Now, his words were the ball is in Arsenal's court. Now, that doesn't say one way or another that he wants to stay or he wants to leave, but it certainly does kind of put the pressure on, particularly saying that in the public domain, that, listen, if you don't give me what I want, you're going to lose me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds from what he's saying like he's open to staying. I don't think he would say anything if he wanted to leave, because normally when players don't want to stay, they're very sort of conspicuous by their absence, aren't they? And they don't say anything. They won't be drawn on anything. If they're interviewed after a match, they'll be like, well, you know, there's still 6 weeks on my contract or whatever, and they don't really commit either way. But by saying the ball's in their court, he's clearly saying that he's open to staying, and that it's just up to the club. Again, everything just points to the club not making decisions when they need to. I think, why are we even risking him going into the final 12 months of his contract? Because then you're just risking another Alexis Sanchez situation. And even though that worked out quite well in terms of he didn't go and smash it at Man United, it could be another Van Persie situation where they lost him relatively cheaply and he went to a rival and scored a load of goals and won trophies and what have you. So it's just one of them, isn't it? Where Arsenal just need to learn from what they've done and sort it out. I mean, this guy's got good enough goal record to suggest he can do it for another couple of years. Just give him what he wants. Just carry on. Or go and buy someone. Just cut it either way. Either don't let it drag on because it's not doing anyone any favours.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking of contracts, Sheffield United have been dishing out contracts, 3 of them, in fact, in the last 7 days. They've tied captain Billy Sharp, vice-captain Ollie Norwood, and now striker David McGoldrick down to new deals. That's all within the space of a week, as I said before. Now, Jim, do you think this will be a sign of things to come, this transfer window, particularly from the smaller clubs? Because, we know the clubs are going to be feeling the pinch due to the coronavirus pandemic and the impact that's had financially on the game. So handing out new deals, we've seen it at Southampton as well in the last couple of weeks. Do you think that's going to be the way that clubs move forward, offering new contracts to their current sort of stalwarts, so to speak?
Yeah, I think 100% that's exactly what we're going to see happen. There's so many unknowns about the transfer window at the moment. I don't think we've had any announcements as to when the season is going to even end or when the next season is going to start. So how people can start planning for a transfer window, I don't know. And that negotiation, those deals should be being done now if you're going to be bringing in new talents. I know we see this flurry of activity on the outside within a very short period of time when the window opens, but realistically those negotiations, those deals are going on for months beforehand. So if the clubs can't make that kind of preparation to bring in new players, they need to just nail down what they've got, even if it's not the ideal scenario. They don't necessarily want to keep hold of these players, and the players you mentioned at Sheffield United, maybe they would have been let go onto pastures new if we hadn't found ourselves in the current situation. But as it stands, they need bodies, they need players, and it's a little bit of the better the devil, I guess.
Yeah, but on the flip side, I suppose, Jim, you could say that very rarely in football do you get a crop of players, a squad, a team camaraderie that really kind of gels and works together. And it appears that under Chris Wilder, Sheffield United have actually got that. And in terms of the statistics, particularly McGoldrick, who signed yesterday, and Billy Sharp earlier this week, they've got 3 goals between them in the Premier League this season. 3 of them have come from Billy Sharp. McGoldrick signed a new deal and he's not scored a single goal this season for Sheffield United. But does it run a little bit deeper than that in terms of, right, we've got a good unit, a good group, and it's more important to keep that together?
Not for me. I think it's probably more to do with the current situation and finances being stretched. I mean, Sheffield United have been one of the most proactive teams in terms of getting their finances in order, which during the current crisis as well. I think they were the first team to take pay deferrals. The playing squad have all done that. And although, 100%, Sheffield United have achieved a lot of what they've achieved this season. Well, they've not achieved anything yet, but potentially where they finish in the table, maybe a European place, through that team spirit and that kind of being this tight unit. At the same time, the club will be well aware that if they're going to kick on to the next level, then they need to recruit sensibly, and there will have to be some kind of turnover of players. But it's then up to the manager to make sure those players coming in are the right types of player that keep that same team unity. So, I mean, my hunch would be that it's more to do with the upcoming unknownness of the transfer window and the financial restrictions that are going to be on the club in terms of bringing in new players, rather than a desire to keep that unity and keep that squad together.
What do you reckon then, Marley? Because as I mentioned, it's not exactly a prolific goal record between Sharp and McGoldrick. And, people use the word rewarded. David McGoldrick has been rewarded with a new deal, but I don't want to slag the guy off. But I know Sheffield United are a newly promoted team, first time back in the top flight for 12 years. But he's not done much, has he really?
You're basically skirting around saying, what's he being rewarded for, aren't you?
Exactly, yeah.
Maybe, I understand where you're coming from in terms of strikers are there to score goals and he hasn't scored goals. But I think, to be fair, I think Sheffield United are probably the most unique club in the country in terms of that togetherness is the reason why they're overachieving, as it were. I mean, what are they, 6th in the Premier League at the minute, and their their squad in terms of man for man doesn't look much, and it never did. But the fact that when they're all pulling in the same direction, it's better to keep that squad together than to start chipping away at players that aren't quite good enough. Because if you look at a normal transfer window, there's probably strikers out there that are better than McGoldrick, and there's midfielders that are out there that are better than Norwood and Billy Sharp and pretty much anyone in that Sheffield United team. But there's no guarantees over whether they will do as good a job as those guys have done. I mean, John Fleck's been amazing this season. John Fleck would probably not make it out the Championship in terms of a transfer target for a Premier League club, but he got there with Sheffield United, and they've been so good, and he's been one of the standout guys that he's been linked with. I think he's linked with moves to Man United in the January window last 6 months ago. So it's crazy how things work. But I think Chris Wilder's definitely one who would rather keep what he's got than take a massive chance on somebody else. Because even with Sander Berger, who's come in January, he dropped out of the team just before the virus stopped the league, because he wasn't quite getting used to the Premier League, and that's probably just and we've got an outside shot at the Champions League if City's ban is upheld and stands. So I think he's not much of a risk taker in that kind of thing. So seeing McGoldrick and Sharp, even though there are better strikers out there, I think he's one to just keep everything as it is and keep ploughing on.
Yeah, I think that Sander Berge transfer does show a little bit of an indication of change in maybe aspirations, though, because he was one of the players that a lot of Premier League teams were chasing, including my team, West Ham. And I think there's a big difference between signing Sander Berge and nailing down 35-year-old Billy Sharp on a new contract. So, I mean, that shows a shift, doesn't it? That shows a change in in your transfer policy or your recruitment policy to signing talent that might be a bit of a chance, might be a bit of a twist rather than stick, because it's a player that's not played in the Premier League, to getting your battle horses and going, right, you're staying for another 200 odd games or however many Billy Sharp's got under his belt at Sheffield.
I'm still shocked that Sander Berger even went to Sheffield United. I mean, no disrespect to them, and they were fine in the league at the time, but it was just a crazy one. Obviously, Chris Wilder's got some good persuasive techniques. He managed to persuade Fergal Brennan to put him in the top 10 of his Sports Social predictions at the start of the season. He might even be proved right. Anyway, the final one on our transfer agenda today is Jadon Sancho, yet again. He's got the world and the Premier League, for that matter, at his feet. But it feels like he's got a choice to make, Marley. I mean, out of the clubs that he could possibly go to, any of them in the world, really. Take your pick, Jayden. But in the Premier League, Man United, Chelsea, Man City. We know he was a Chelsea fan as a youngster. We know he was part of the Manchester City Academy before he joined Borussia Dortmund. I mean, what's your opinion? Has your opinion changed since the start of the season, or maybe even January? Or where do you think he'll end up? Or will he stay at Dortmund?
It's the £150 million question, isn't it? Because he could go anywhere. And before the season, I was thinking he would stay another year at Dortmund. However, the speculation is so intense that it seems like he is going to leave sooner rather than later. So it also looks like Man United are making the biggest moves for him. But I don't know what's the best move for him. I think if you look at it from a if everything was equal, I think Man City is obviously the best club to go to, especially if Sane leaves. If he goes to Bayern, then there's a clear spot in that team where he would get games. But I don't think he wants to go back. It doesn't seem like he would go back, 2 years after leaving for being overlooked. So it seems like Man United would be the most his choice kind of thing. But I just don't know if there's so much uncertainty over Man United of how good they are and how close they are to challenging for titles, because Sancho's clearly one who wants to go and trust himself and win things. I don't know if Man United is the best option for him in that sense, because there's still questions over the squad. There's still a massive wage budget. They've got a cut. They've still got Sanchez to go. There's the Pogba situation. That speculation never leaves. There's the questions over whether Pogba and Fernandes can play in the same team. Can they gel? Can they propel Man United to a title charge? There's all sorts of stuff, but they've got a young English core, and maybe that's something that could attract Sancho. I think with Chelsea would be another one who would be a good move for him, but with them signing Werner and Ziyech and having a 22-year-old Pulisic, as well as Willian and Pedro and Giroud,
maybe Havertz as well coming in.
Maybe, yeah, they're sorted. I doubt they'll properly move for him. So I don't know. Maybe Man United is the the one that are in the best position to get him. But whether they'll shell out money is another thing, because, like I said, they have got a lot of stuff to. I mean, Sancho's on 190 grand a week. That's another, that's a top tier, top wage budget structure. So do they have to get rid of others? Maybe this speeds up the fire sale at Man United, because they need one. They've got a lot of deadwood in that squad, as well as a lot of good young players. But Sancho would be the absolute premium for them. It'd be amazing. But it's whether you can pull him back to the Premier League now and stick it in the faces of Man City, the sort of noisy neighbours that never played him. So it would be interesting.
I think if you go through it on logic, Jim, Marley's got a really good point. If you look at Chelsea's squad, he was a Chelsea fan, but they've dished out money on Werner. Looks like Havertz is coming in, Ziyech is coming in, Pulisic's there already. They've got some good players. Ed Woodward, the executive vice chairman at Manchester United, has said, we're not going to splash the big cash this summer, but he says that pretty much every summer anyway. So you would argue that Jadon Sancho, as Marley says, is not going to cost you any less than 150 million quid in the current climate. So, I mean, Manchester City, maybe he doesn't want to go back there in terms of kind of proving a point, saying, I told you so. Or maybe he will go back there. Who knows? I mean, if we're trying to use a rule of logic here, that's even difficult to kind of ascertain where he's going to end up.
I saw an article at the weekend. I can't remember which footballing website it was on, but it said Jayden Sancho will sign for Manchester United if two things can be agreed. And the first thing was a transfer fee, and the second thing was personal terms. I was like, wow, genius football journalism, which I guess it's difficult to argue against that. But I just got a feeling he's not going anywhere.
That's the same thing keeping him from signing for Portsmouth, funnily enough, Jim.
I think we're going to see him in a Dortmund shirt again next season. I know there's a load of rumours about him moving to all these big clubs and massive transfer fees. And maybe that was the case before we had the coronavirus crisis. But I think for all the reasons we've detailed about other teams maybe being cautious in the market, that could prevent him from leaving this window. The lack of pre-season, the lack of settling time he'd have with a new squad. He's still a really young player, and it's easy to forget that because of how good he is, but he's still really young. He's still got development left in him. He's got this burgeoning partnership with Alf-Inge Haaland at Dortmund, which is looking absolutely inspired. And he's a man who's just...
Alf-Inge Haaland? He's like
his dad.
6 now, Jim.
What's his name?
Erling.
You mean Erling?
Erling Braut. Yeah, him. That one. Yeah, he's not playing with Alf-Inge. He plays FIFA with Alf-Inge Haaland. And then, yeah, that's what I meant. Okay. So he's got this burgeoning relationship there. He looks like he's really enjoying his football at the moment. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say he won't leave this window, and he might play another season in Dortmund, and then he'll be off.
Jim proving there that he's still stuck in the late 90s with the reference to Alf-Inge Haaland.
That's not the only proof of that.
Anyway, that's it for today's Football Social Daily. Cheers, Jim. Cheers, Marley. Don't forget that the podcast is now available on YouTube. So go and check our YouTube channel out. It's the Sports Social, the same as Facebook and Twitter, and of course, Instagram too. And we'll be back on Wednesday and every day after that as well until the end of the season, because the podcast will be back to full time. So we'll speak to you on Wednesday when the Premier League is back. But that's it for now on Football Social Daily.